KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more, Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
Welcome back to Part 2 of KPBS Cinema Junkies' preview of the 2019 TCM Classic Film Festival. I'm Beth Accomando. As I mentioned in Part 1 of this podcast, we're trying some new things here at KPBS, so bear with us as we grow and change. Episodes will now be 30 minutes in length, so we can be included in the NPR One app and reach a larger audience. And soon, there'll be some short spots running inside each podcast. So this week's preview podcast of the TCM Classic Film Festival comes to you in 2 parts. In Part 1, I spoke with TCM Classic Film Festival programmer Charles Tabesh about what the festival has to offer. And for Part 2, I speak with Schawn Belston, the archivist at 20th Century Fox, who will be hosting a presentation at the festival dedicated to looking back on the history of the Fox studio. The studio faces some changes under its new owner of Disney. This Fox-Disney merger has already resulted in a large number of layoffs, and the future of the actual Fox studio lot is still up in the air. But Schawn Belston is hopeful that Disney's dedication to preserving its own history will extend to its newly acquired Fox properties. I've always wanted to speak with a film archivist because I think their work is incredibly important, and I don't think most people fully understand or appreciate what they do. I started my interview by asking Belston how he would define what his job is.
Sure. Thanks for asking. I mean, my job is a combination of a lot of things, from the sort of sublime to the banal. My job is part archaeologist, part filmmaker wrangler, and part just manager of physical assets around the world. My job actually kind of covers the gamut of responsibilities, from things like making sure that our vaults are the right temperature and that the film is perpetuated, the film and tapes are stored in an environment that perpetuates them safely for future generations, to more exciting things like working with filmmakers on the restoration and preservation of their artistic achievements.
Now, the idea of film preservation has not been something that's been with the film industry since its inception. So, when did this kind of consciousness of needing to take really good care of these kind of, even the most fundamental thing, like just having a good negative around or something, when did that kind of come into play and really start being kind of a movement for studios to kind of save their past?
Yeah, film was totally disposable, or thought of as totally disposable, for most of its first century, really. It wasn't until the late 1980s when Martin Scorsese and a group of like-minded filmmakers approached all the major studios to start film restoration and preservation departments that, at least in Hollywood, it really took root. So it's thanks to the work of the Film Foundation that all started as a kind of movement in Hollywood. This is the late 1980s. Film archives, though, existed much before that. So going clear back to the 30s, places like the Museum of Modern Art, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has had a film archive for a very long time. The UCLA Film and Television Archive, all in America, not to mention a number of really prominent film archives around the world that predate what we think of in Hollywood as the sort of movement to restore and preserve our libraries.
How did you get into this position? Because do people study to do this? Was this something that you wanted to do? How did you get into this job?
Today it's different than when I started, because today there are a number of postgraduate programs where you can go and study and learn about the history of archiving and all of the technical practices required to do the job. When I started, there wasn't really that sort of a thing, and it was a matter of kind of learning on the job. A passion for movies, which I've had since I was a kid, was really the entry point for me. And in the mid-1990s, when I came to work at Fox, passionate about movies, I just happened to be lucky enough to work for a person who was a champion and said, "Oh, you should go to the lab and find out how all this stuff works." And a bunch of really great people at Deluxe Film Lab who are no longer around took me under their wing and sort of showed me the ropes of how a film lab works. And I learned literally kind of on the job.
The upcoming TCM Film Festival is going to have a panel kind of paying tribute to Fox and to the work you do. How did that come about, and what's that going to entail?
I'm super excited about it, actually, because it's been an interesting and exciting time here at the studio as we've been for the last 15 months working on the toward a transition to being part of the Walt Disney Company. And as part of that, Stacy Snyder, the chairman of Fox, championed with the TCM Festival doing some sort of a Fox section. And part of that, so we're running a number of Fox movies at the festival, titles both super well-known as well as some obscurities. And they asked me to make a clip show sort of celebrating the film restoration department that we've had here for over 20 years. The clip show is a kind of personal journey through our preservation department, providing an overview of the Fox library. It's 90 minutes of me telling stories about various restoration projects that we've worked on, as well as a bit of the history of the studio, and then showing as many clips as possible, which is the most fun, of course, but also kind of the hardest, because figuring out if you have a finite amount of time, what clips do you show to represent the library fairly. It's been a really fun process to kind of put together my career of being responsible for the library and getting to know most of the films that Fox made. There are a lot of Sophie's choices that have to be made about, what movies should you include and not include. And just as fun as it is to put together, like, well, obviously there has to be a clip from The Sound of Music, but there are other movies that are just as beloved to me that didn't make the cut.
It's like choosing who your favorite child is, right?
It is like totally like choosing your favorite child is. And I've done a few little kind of test runs of this. I'm not a showman by trade, really. And it's funny because it's been a process for me getting to put this thing together. I've been really lucky to get to do it because it's been a really wonderful opportunity to reflect on 100 years of the Fox, 20th Century Fox Corporation, and as well as my own personal loves. 1979, I'll give you an example. 1979 is a huge movie year at Fox. It was the year of Alien, most famously, but also All That Jazz and Norma Rae and Breaking Away and The Rose. All of those movies are terrific, and I think would belong in any kind of historical clip show. You can't not have Alien, so Alien is in there. But I love All That Jazz, Bob Fosse's picture, so much that I couldn't not include it somehow. So that's actually the only year where they've got two movies. Actually, that's not true. Never mind, because there are two movies from 1970 also. But it's 1979. Including All That Jazz is like a question of not a movie that is particularly well known, but is a movie that I just personally love. So I got to make a few selections like that, at the cost of no Home Alone, for example.
Now, I understand you don't want to give away what your program's going to be, but can you talk about the films that are screening in their entirety that are going to be at the TCM Film Festival?
Where we went back and forth so many times with Charlie Tabesh and the team there, who are just terrific, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So they are running, so many great movies. They're running 70 millimeter Sound of Music, which is difficult to see in 70 millimeter. That should be really spectacular at a new venue, this American Legion Post 43 building on Highland, which is this really kind of beautiful old meeting room come movie theater that I'm excited about. That's also where my appreciation clip show is. But they're running many of my own favorite movies, which I realize are many people's favorite Fox movies. Marilyn Monroe and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which is an incredible use of Technicolor, but also it's like Marilyn at her most Marilyn. Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend is worth going for alone. Working Girl, the great Mike Nichols movie that we restored with Mike and his cameraman Michael Bauhaus, who shot it. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which we restored with the great cinematographer Conrad Hall. Shirley Temple and The Little Colonel, and then, of course, again, another movie that you can't talk about the history of Fox without screening is Star Wars, which for me was the movie that started it all. It was the movie that I saw when I was very small that sort of inspired my own love of movies. So it's been, for me, a kind of a fun, full circle career that I remember so vividly seeing that movie in my small town in Powell, Wyoming, where people lined up outside. There were only 5,000 people in the town, but there was still a line of people waiting for the next show. It made such a big impression on me. It's been kind of incredible is really the only word I can use to describe the fact that I then got to 20 some years later, got to actually work on the preservation of it. So that's running also at the Chinese Theater on Saturday night, so I'm excited about that.
And that is the special edition version, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is the DCP of the 1997 special editions, which actually inspired, our restoration department here at Fox. The Star Wars movies, as a company, Fox had an archive, and we had a sort of preservation department, really. We had a preservation department, really, that made copies of movies for archiving, for maintaining geographic separation of assets, which is a whole other thing we could talk about some other time if you like. But there wasn't really a proper restoration department, and the restoration of the creation of the special edition of the Star Wars movies was the impetus to start that. George Lucas had saved all of the elements better than the studio had, and they were really useful in restoring that movie, Star Wars: A New Hope. But it also really lit the fire at the studio about the condition of our assets. Before that, even with the work that Marty and the Film Foundation was doing, there wasn't a huge amount of traction here at Fox for restoration. I think the assumption was, well, it's probably not as bad as they're saying. But the state of Star Wars woke everybody up to like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually something that is important and if our film heritage is something that we have to proactively manage. It doesn't just sort of exist in the vault and we can drag it out whenever we want, like an old book. So we started. It was the Star Wars special edition. My boss, Ted Galliano, at the time, and I put together a proposal to the studio to start a restoration department with 10 movies. They said yes, and we were off to the races. So it's really Star Wars that we owe a great debt of gratitude for all these other movies that have been preserved. In fact, all of the ones that are running at the TCM Festival are, in one way or another, inspired by the work that we did on Star Wars.
So, in terms of your department, how many people are working on archives and on preservation? Is it a large department, small department?
It's a relatively small department. Just in terms of restoration and preservation, we've got about 5 people that work on it, and it kind of has grown and shrunk over the years as the market has dictated. So much of what we have to do, because we're a for-profit business, of course, is we have to prioritize things based on their marketability, on the value of them, as well as the creative importance, this cultural significance, which is quite important. So, in the heyday of DVD, for example, when there was a much bigger, obvious market for the catalog, we were able to do more than we do now. But Fox has been very committed over the last 2 decades to preserving their part of our movie heritage, and remains so today. So yes, it's like 5 people, and we work on, I think we have at any one time probably 20 or so movies going.
This seems to be a particularly kind of tumultuous time for Fox with the Disney merger. How does that feel for you? I mean, do you feel like a little nostalgic about, what Fox was and that it may be different moving forward, or how does that feel for you?
I'm excited, actually, because it feels like we're on the brink of some whole new evolution, and we're on the brink of a whole new chapter in the story of Fox, which I think is, as an archivist, we tend to embrace the past, and I like that, and I'm all for it, and I definitely feel very nostalgic, and I have a picture on my desk of Walt Disney and Daryl Zanuck together at some award show, and they're both smiling, and I think Disney's presenting Zanuck with some kind of a trophy, and I would love to. I can't help but wonder what they would make of this world that we live in today. What would they make of these two companies, these two legendary companies coming together? It's exciting because it's opportunity. They have a huge library. We have a huge library. We have very different libraries. And how the people whose responsibility is to figure out how to combine them and monetize them and make them interesting, I think is going to be really fun to see how that unfolds. I hope I get to be a part of it, And from an archival point of view, another thing that I'm responsible for, all of the objects, props and posters and costumes on ephemera, and Disney has just been historically super dedicated to the preservation of that, and I'm excited to see how that kind of gets applied, those practices get applied to our collection, which we have admittedly been, very passionate about, but have not done as much publicly with.
To give people an idea of kind of the work and the detective work sometimes that goes into preserving or restoring or keeping these films, is there one film that you want to highlight as an example and maybe give a little insight into what went into preserving it or bringing it back to life?
Sure. So for most of the films that are owned by the studio, you would assume that the obvious thing is we would have all of the best material because we own the movies. But for Fox, all of the films made pre-1950 are in bad shape. That's primarily because the nitrate film stock that they were all photographed on was decided to be a liability by the studio in the 1970s, and they copied the films and then destroyed the original material. So sometimes the best material on those films is actually not in our own archive, but is somewhere else. Quite often, in fact, that is the case. So we've had a lot of collaborative relation. We've had a long collaboration with film archives around the world, and all kinds of really interesting things have come out of that. UCLA, for example, has a very big Fox collection, including a version of My Darling Clementine, which is another of my favorite movies, that's different than the release version at Fox. The Jules Dassin picture Night in the City, we have the original, we have the nitrate original negative, but there are two other cuts of the movie that exist in film archives. So that is really interesting to find out, what other people have. But to me, probably the most interesting recent example from the last 10 years anyway, was a discovery in New Zealand of a bunch of American silent films. Among them was a John Ford picture that was thought to be lost called Upstream, which is a terrific little movie. It was found by some American archivists who were invited down to New Zealand to help them catalog this film. And we restored the movie in collaboration with the Academy Film Archive and the New Zealand Film Archive. And it was really kind of amazing to get to see and then show a new John Ford movie 100 years later to people.
What was maybe the strangest way you came across a film? I mean, you hear sometimes, somebody, when they passed away, they found a box of film in their garage or something was under the bed and they didn't know. Is there any case of that was particularly surprising?
Well, there are two things. I mean, Upstream was discovered. So Upstream, the reason that Upstream was in New Zealand was there was a projectionist, a local projectionist who had collected film over the years, and then that film had eventually ended up at the New Zealand Film Archive. And so Upstream was saved by an unnamed Kiwi projectionist who just kept it in his garage for years. That's the closest story that I have to that specific kind of thing. But we have a lot of these kind of discoveries happen all the time. I'm still hopeful, in fact, that the great white whale of lost movies for me is a picture called The Four Devils, which was F.W. Murnau was this great German expressionist director who made Sunrise, which is also running at the TCM Festival. Sunrise is maybe his masterpiece. Great movie. He was lured by William Fox to America to make whatever movie he wanted, and he made Sunrise, and then he made a movie right afterward called Four Devils, which the contemporary reviews say, Four Devils is even better than Sunrise, if you can believe that, and it's lost, or believed to be lost. I'm hopeful that it's going to pop up somewhere in someone's attic or garage, or maybe European Film Archive, who knows. But anyway, the other example, really, of this kind of like oddball discovery was a whole cache of nitrate film that was being stored by Fox, actually under our noses, and we didn't know it existed, in Ogdensburg, New Jersey. So in 1999, we went back to New Jersey to help them pack up the film vaults there that had been part of the Fox and Deluxe family for decades, back to the 30s, I think. Anyway, mostly what we thought we were going there to pack up was the Movietone news footage, which was going to be deposited at the Library of Congress. As we were going through the newsreels and talking to these great guys who ran that facility, every time there was a movie-related, a motion picture-related newsreel, a movie premiere or something, I was excited about it. And so finally, after like a week, one of the guys said, "Hey, you really like movies, don't you? You should see the movie footage that we have." And I said, "Oh, yeah, well, that's what we're doing here, packing up the Movietone." He said, No, we have movies. We have movie material also. And in the back of the property, they had stored nitrate film that we had thought we had records had been destroyed, but in fact, they hadn't actually destroyed it. They just sort of tucked it away. And in there were some original camera negatives and super useful secondary elements, fine-grain masters and dupe negatives, which are elements that are very commonly used in film restoration. But the biggest find in there was the original negative of Jules Dassin's Night in the City, which was incredible to come across. And even more incredibly, we got to preserve the movie. We made a new print. And when Mr. Dassin was on his final trip to Los Angeles, we had him over to the studio and showed him a print of the movie from the original negative, which he had never seen because of the circumstances in which the movie was made with the blacklist. He was in Europe, etc. He never saw a print from the ONEG, he said, until 2001, I think it was.
Okay, now I have this image of like the Lost Ark of the Covenant, those big, warehouses venturing in to find something.
Well, nitrate's super dangerous, right?
Right.
So it can be very dangerous. It's a bit properly cared for. Nitrate is fine, but as it deteriorates, it gets pretty dodgy. And
volatile.
So, these people had decided it was just not safe, so they just instead of incinerating it or disposing of it, they just tucked it away into the in the back of a vault in the back of the property, and there it sat, which was lucky for me, lucky for Fox.
And can you give people an idea of, we think that things are saved and preserved, but the bulk of films have really been lost, haven't they? Yeah, there's a statistic that's kind of passed around that something like more than half of all the films before 1950 are lost. But certainly the silent era and early sound era, film was a distribution mechanism more than a piece of art. So the films were transported around the world, really, and just run until they couldn't be run anymore and then thrown away. There were a few kind of key moments. There was a big fire in New Jersey in the mid-1930s that burned down a lot of warehouses that stored a lot of silent-era films. That was probably the biggest single loss of that generation of film. People didn't really think about film as something worth saving, and as a result, so much of it pre-1950 is just simply gone. I think it's very fun, though, to think of the fact that it may exist out there, at least in small, very key ways in private hands. People have loved movies since the beginning, and people who love them have saved them. You've probably heard the story in the last few years of the discovery of more of the missing footage from Metropolis in was it Buenos Aires, I think. So as long as there are people who love movies in the world, I feel like maybe there's a chance that some of these films will reappear, but so many are gone. The Library of Congress actually has a great registry of all the silent films that we know, American silent films that we know exist, and those that we know or we believe to be lost. And as an archivist, what are you looking to in the future in terms of, now everything seems to be moving to digital, and is that better, worse, uncertain? From an archival point of view, I think we're at an interesting inflection point that's not unlike what I was talking about with silent film, where we take for granted the perpetuation and the sort of permanence of digital media, which I think may not be entirely sound. It is likely, although I hope not, that we may be in a position 25 years from now where we say, oh, gee, all those early digital movies are lost in their original form because we didn't properly preserve them. The studios have digital preservation strategies, but there's all kinds of independent cinema, and as the making of movies has become so democratized, I wonder what about so many movies that I love that are independent, that don't have the resources or the sort of institutional structure around, here's how we should perpetuate these.
I worry that a lot of that will be lost. And I think that that's probably the next big thing that our field should focus on, is how do we perpetuate digitally born movies of all shapes and sizes for future generations.
I feel like there's this confidence on a certain level in digital as opposed to analog, and yet we don't know what 50 years down the road might reveal about what these formats are capable of in terms of how durable they are.
The appearance of media being ubiquitous in the digital era is an illusion, right? It seems like, if I can get it on iTunes, it must exist in a way that I'll always be able to access it, for example. And while that may or may not actually be true, because what's underneath the thing that's on a digital platform is completely temporal and temporary, and it's governed by a license, and it's a compressed version, and yada, yada, yada. We still believe strongly, I shouldn't say that, I still believe strongly in analog media. And that's not necessarily to degrade the quality of a digital to fit it onto an analog form. For example, a piece of magnetic sound film does not have the same frequency response as we're able to get in the digital world. I'm not suggesting that we should downgrade to be Luddites, but there is the opportunity, on the picture side anyway, to record data to film in a way that will perpetuate it. God forbid something happened to the digital original material. And so we still do that. We still record black and white, panchromatic, YCM masters on all of our movies, in case someday someone needs to scan them to make a new digital version.
Is there any misconception you think people might have about film preservation or archives that you'd want to address, or something that you want people to know about what you do that you think they may not fully appreciate?
I guess the thing that I feel people should know is that we shouldn't take for granted that our favorite movies are just going to always be there. Because without very specific and careful practice, storage, preservation, they won't be perpetuated into the future. And I don't know how much we appreciate the sort of temporariness of movies.
It's a little bit kind of poetic and romantic about the medium.
I think you have to be poetic and romantic about it. It's art.
Well, and it's film. There's something, I've always loved movies, so I've always found something particularly magical about film and about those images on the big screen, so yeah.
Me too, and I love both. I've come to love both. I was definitely and am in my heart a film lover. I like seeing the flicker, right? Seeing the unsteadiness of the film as it moves through the machine. The kind of fact that it just seems kind of impossible and magic that works somehow. I love that. But I've come around to love digital also in what it can do, in the fact that it's super repeatable, and the most fun is being in a room with a few hundred people watching a movie, right? Whether it's digital or not. Like, I still love going to the local AMC and seeing a Dolby Vision of the new Chris Nolan movie, and it's fantastic and perfect, and the audience laughs and cries the same as they do, at a 70-millimeter screening of Patton.
Well, I want to thank you very much for speaking with me and hopefully enlightening people as to what you do in the archive department, and I look forward to seeing your presentation at TCM.
Well, thanks. It's my pleasure. I'll see you there.
That was Schawn Belston, Executive Vice President of Library and Technical Services at 20th Century Fox. He'll be hosting the Fox Appreciation Program on April 13th at the TCM Classic Film Festival. Thanks for listening to another episode of KPBS Cinema Junkie Podcast. Till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt or for home improvements by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Learn more at splatero.com.